Thanks, Kevin, and thank you to Kite for being a longtime sponsor of LA Best. We couldn't do it without you. Well, you've heard of Bench to Bedside. This next panel will focus on labs to lives and will showcase innovative strategies to rare diseases. Please welcome Abla Creasey, a former vice president of CIRM, who will introduce the next group of panelists.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good day and nice to have you here. My name is Abla Creasey. I'm a rare disease advocate. I really want to thank the UCLA Technology Development Group and specifically Mark Wicenowski and Judy Gasson, I think she's here, yes, for selecting me to conduct this panel with the topic, since I am a rare patient advocate, to really address a key issue relative to rare disease therapeutics development. It is really an important topic that is both urgent and deeply personal to many of us in the room and outside this room. However, we move innovative therapies to rare diseases from discovery to patient access. That pathway really needs remodeling, if you want to call it that way. Science has delivered and has endowed us with transformative technologies. We need to translate those transformative technologies and breakthroughs into therapies that patients can reach, they can afford, and benefit from it in a timely way and in a scalability fashion. So today, the panel members specifically collected for spelling out technologies and the modalities that will help us explore how we can reimagine the development paradigm for delivery and scalability of these therapies so that progress in the lab truly becomes a new way for patient care and, more importantly, can enable the vision, our vision, collective vision, and vision of all the parents who have children who would like to treat them with, into a reality, hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a privilege to have the 6 experts in the field, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So we start with Jeremy.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Shane. I'm the founder of a company called Life for Health that's creating long-term payment structures, and I'm here as a non-resident fellow at the USC Schaeffer Institute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Ayoub. I'm a double Bruin, PhD and MBA by training here, and really focusing on the cell and gene therapy space within rare diseases. Currently the CEO of Rarity, PBC, a public benefit corporation pushing forward gene therapies for rare diseases.
Hi, I'm Don Kohn. I'm a professor here at UCLA in the Microbiology, Immunology, and Molecular Genetics Department, Pediatric Hemonc, and Molecular Pharmacology. And I am a pediatric bone marrow transplant physician, and my research is on treating genetic blood diseases with gene therapy.
Hi, I'm Maria Gonzalez Bonneville. I'm the vice chair of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine Governing Board, and my background is in state politics and public policy.
Hi, I'm Mimi Lee. I'm a physician scientist trained in neurosurgery, anesthesia, and neuroscientist. I have been working in gene therapies development for the last decade, starting with BioMarin and the Roctavian product, and then moving on to Avexis Novartis. I most recently served as a program manager at ARPA-H and launched a program called Thrive, trying to leverage the technology to innovate the healthcare system that is required to scale affordably and accessibly genetic medicines. I'm now starting a nonprofit called Opus 132, which is to do exactly this. We could halt the slide. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Salimullah. So I spent over just a decade overseeing the first approved CAR T therapy when we done the tech transfer at Nevada through Carl June's lab, and then most recently overseeing the widely used AAV9 in SMA to 5,000 patients in 60 countries, and currently work as a venture partner and building early companies in the space of genomic medicines.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Really exciting to have you here, albeit for a short period of time. We picked our brains for the last couple weeks, so I'm so glad that they can still relax and give us further answers. So we're going to start with Jeremy. So Jeremy, we often talk about designing for approval, but not always for access. From your perspective, what does it mean to design for access from the outset? And how should pricing and payment models, by the way, he's an expert in that area, evolve to support that?
Thanks, Abla. I think there's really three things. And one is, to your question, defining the finish line. And in my mind, the finish line is that everybody who can benefit from a therapy can get it, and that over time we learn who those therapies work in, why, and to what extent, and over what time frame. And to get to that finish line, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning before people are even patients. And in this space in particular, you've got to aggregate and build demand, create the pipeline. The opportunities for the modalities that are being developed transcend the size of the populations in some of the rare genetic disease areas, and finding common cause with other kinds of disease conditions, not approaching this on a one-off kind of basis, is important to activate those individuals and educate them, as we saw in the video, as well as to create better reimbursement models. The key thing, I think, that in between to the bottom part in terms of the pricing is we need new kinds of financial intermediaries who sit between manufacturers, hospitals, individuals, clinicians, and insurers, and basically take the risk of the long-term outcome and success of these therapies. And so they can provide some financing up front to when a therapy is approved to drug manufacturers, but they hold the risk of the long-term kind of outcomes that insurers and payers and others then pay them for. And this is a model that we have in many other industries where you have large upfront capital investments and long payback horizons. We need to bring that into this space as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. Paul? So, Paul, building on what Jeremy said, how do we move from one-off treatments, which we now do, to scalable models that can serve many patients while still maintaining value add and sustainability?
Yeah, thank you, Abla. The current bespoke treatment, so to speak, of each patient carries a high burden and high fixed costs with each treatment, and that's at present unsustainable, especially in the ultra-rare disease space, without some form of cross-subsidization. And so if we really do want to think about moving towards a sustainable future, I think it all comes with some form of shared infrastructure and shared processes. And I think that also can see itself throughout the life cycle of development. In the manufacturing space, at the very least, where we're looking to employ within Rarity, one of the key components is trying to think about, and this I'll get to, might also touch a little bit on what Shane said, but Jeremy said, but the manufacturing component, also has to carry, let's say, shared vector backbones, shared cell therapy processing, shared analytics, standardized workflow, particularly because that can help drive down costs down the line. I mean, the FDA has started to signal that throughout these past 2 years, starting in May of 2024 with their announcement of the platform designation, following again in December of 25 with their announcement of the plausible mechanism framework, and setting precedent with the approval of the Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome coming out of Italy. Within that press release, they had described that program had utilized data coming from another program before it in order to accelerate their approval. And so there's been this mentality that the agency's been trying to put forward of data portability. How can we utilize data that's coming from a manufacturing process prior and applying that to another program in the future? And when we think about ultra-rare diseases, you can innovate, right? We can move to in vivo therapies. We can start to think about decreasing the cost as manufacturing becomes cheaper. You cannot change small patient populations. And in order to start to scale, we have to prevent the redefining and revalidating of our processes down the line. And sharing all of this is important to do so. And the last point that I'll make in connection to what Jeremy said is access has to start upstream. And so when we start to develop these types of therapies, we have to think about it at the very beginning. If you are an ultra-rare company that is treating 10 patients per year, you should stick to that model. Stick to the validated processes that you've gotten there, because that will decrease your costs down the line. If you use it as an entryway for a bigger therapy, you've lost all the economies of learning and the economies of scope that you could build from that. And so I think the conversation starts quite early.
Yeah, Mimi, would you like to comment on this in relationship to what you've been thinking about?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Abla. I think that I agree with both Jeremy and Paul. I think we're at a very, very unique time in history, maybe, where we can think about imagining a different business model. So we are, the idea of treating patients as a one-off, we just heard in the video, the CAR Ts are delivered to single patients as a personalized medicine. If we think in the future we are all genomically, individually unique, i.e. rare, if we can solve for rare, non-commercially addressed markets today, i.e. ends of one or small, then that will be the future. With CAR Ts and genetic medicines, I mentioned earlier, I've been doing genetic medicines therapeutics, including approvals and commercial. They've essentially all been commercial failures. If you look at the number of R&D dollars invested, worked with Tay at Novartis, and we had a big pipeline at Avexis. I invite this audience to think about a model of interventions. So similar to we've seen this before, that we have, it's not a great example, but dialysis, we have infusion centers, we have ambulatory surgery centers. To think of a CAR T delivery or a precision genetic medicine delivery as an intervention. Interventional genetics is going to be another field, a specialty. All physicians, I'm a physician, will learn how to use genomics as another tool in our kit. Every newborn, when ultrasound came out, we started doing ultrasound scans of every fetus during pregnancy as a standard of care to look for fetal anatomical abnormalities. We will be doing that for every fetus and pregnant person to look at genomic variants that might indicate disease. The problem right now is we only really know what 5% of the genome does, how it functions, the protein encoding regions. We don't know how the genome works. So we need to generate that human interventional data so that we can look forward to AI accuracy that's trained on human data to learn what functional genomics and systems human biology looks like. So that in the future, one day, we will all be seen and treated by medicine as individually unique people. It's a different business model. It's not the pharma drug first model. It is the patient first model, and creating and developing therapies that are the right medicine for that patient in that time of their life.
Thank you. How about we have Don comment, since he's the clinician who treated so many rare disease patients. Will you please go ahead, Don?
Sure. So I think one of the great revolutions of the past decade in medical science is the ability to fix individual mutations, things like base editing and prime editing, where now if I get a family refers a patient to me with a mutation, a graduate student in my lab will have an editor that can fix that mutation in a few weeks. How you go from that to a commercially available product is the real challenge. And I think, adding to other people's comments, we need regulatory reform, because still every product is treated like it's something to treat 100,000 patients. So the burden to get FDA approval for products where N equals 1 or N equals few is really one of the major challenges. And I think there needs to be a different way of maintaining quality, but really reducing the cost to bring things to commercial status.
And how are we going to be able to scale that model with blessing from the FDA, or we do it up front, or we do it later?
Well, I think Paul made the point about platform designation.
Right.
So if we are treating, in many diseases, different patients, there might be 100 different mutations across the population in that gene. And instead of having to develop 100 different drugs, if we can get the first one approved, then just make minor changes to bring them on, we can expand the scope of conditions we can treat without starting from square one for each one.
Yeah, and by the way, Mimi and I and CIRM developed also the model for a platform and how to use the platform to accelerate development for more than one patient. Mimi, you want to comment?
Yes, just to add on to that. So in the program that she's referring to, if you can think of not needing regulation for every drug, But with a platform, you have an engine. You know, the same chassis is used in a Mini Cooper that's used in a BMW 3 Series. You have an engine, and the process can be accredited, approved and accredited. The UK is doing this right now with ASO LMPs, the Rare Disease Launchpad, in coordination with the MHRA. And the idea is once that is approved, then any center can deliver that to their communities once they license that process. That then expands and scales access to communities to be and remain where they are. If they can network, we have the tools now to create what we're creating as a virtual institute that takes the expertise and the capabilities from all over the world that can then feed back to communities where they are to treat their local populations.
Thank you, Mimi. And so now we go to Maria, and we talk about what importance does coordination play, and how can we coordinate that effort with all the stakeholders in order to enable what Jeremy, Paul, Don, and Mimi have said so far. So please comment.
So I think on an individual basis, PIs and the research programs are getting better at coordinating stakeholders just within their small niche as their programs progress. So they are reaching out to the stakeholders involved. So they need, the insurers, manufacturers, et cetera. I think on a, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is an example of that. So they really, they knew what they needed to produce to get that therapy to market faster and to the patients faster. And I think you have to look at that and see how you can expand that from on a bigger level. So how do you bring all the stakeholders together? You need a trusted entity. You need to build relationships, and then you need to get them all at the right table and willing to look at what it takes to lower the cost, lower the amount of time for reimbursement, all of the barriers that everyone finds when they're bringing Don can speak to this, I'm sure, when they're bringing this to market. So I think if we could create an entity or we could create a pilot in California and show that it works, we are primed to do that. We have the ecosystem, we have the money, we have CIRM, we have the California Institute that UCLA has, we have all of these players. And if California can make it happen. If anyone can make it happen, California can make it happen. So I think it's on us to find the right trusted source to bring that pilot to market.
Yeah, relative to coordination, the symbolism that Mimi used, which is about how do you construct a car? So if you're constructing a car and you don't do it one at a time and you sell only one car per year, you sell 1,000. So how are we going to get that there with humans with rare diseases and then eventually with chronic diseases?
I think one of the first big pieces is this is a phenomenal time right now. Institutions, things as we knew how the world ran are really being demolished, which is a great, ripe sandbox to innovate something new. I think thinking of ways to work public-private partnerships across all of the moats that have been created that require transactional partnerships. If we can build more bridges, work across those moats, and basically build a more collaborative ecosystem. I used to be asked, how are we going to create the ecosystem of healthcare for precision genetic medicines and CAR-Ts with what we have now? And I would laugh and say, we're not going to put the square peg in the round hole. We have to innovate what the system should look like. And so I agree, California is a perfect place to pilot and show what this can look like. It's a big state, we have the money, we have, importantly, the institutions that exist, and we have plenty of companies and the expertise to make this happen. But it requires everybody, all hands on deck. It's interdisciplinary. I call it an interdisciplinary institute. And really thinking not in a pharma model of let's create a drug. If we create this drug, people will come. But it's more putting the patient back in the center and saying, we have a patient, let's solve for this patient. We crank that engine around and around and around. And eventually, we're not just treating the rare, unaddressed population now. We're we're treating all of us as individually, uniquely rare.
Yeah, Tay, can I please ask Tay to comment regarding what was said so far, since you already have experience in commercialization and move programs all the way through approval and beyond?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the sentiment of the panel. I think we are just bridging on what Mimi said, that I think we are at an inflection point. And I don't want to be, offend anyone, but we over-indexed on good science for good reasons. And what I heard from Dr. Kohn is in a couple of weeks, is lab PhDs can create a product. We all heard the recent baby KJ. When I first started out, 2012, 13, there was a hypothesis we would never do the tech transfer from Carl June's lab, would never enroll in an IND, and would never be able to do the tech transfer. So people are living a decade on now. With spinal muscular atrophy, we've got children who can walk, sit, stand, going into their 9th year off a ventilator. So what does this all mean? I think we've solved for science, and we'll continue to solve. What I'm interested in is how we elevate and lean in to solving for, I would say, opportunities beyond the regulator. Downstream, how the system delivers. And more importantly for me, my big realization, having not gone to a gene and cell therapy school, was it deeply starts with understanding the diagnostic odyssey of what patients, families, caregivers go through on a daily basis. And once you are able to demystify that and build your trial endpoints, your POC, respecting that, and we used to call it in neuroscience, time is neurons. You don't want patients to deteriorate. So I think you have to start with the end in mind, and ensure that the platform you choose, the target indication you're going after, you're actually thinking about the evolution of the market and what's going to happen. So in summary, for me, it starts deeply with understanding that diagnostic odyssey. Number 2, it's the ability to co-create beyond the regulators. And, our healthcare systems, whether, in the US, we've seen it in other, are really designed and incentivized around chronic treatments and around seeing sick patients. And when you're trying to disrupt that, and you then don't have PBMs or specialty pharmacy and markups, this is a very disruptive approach. I think we'll get there. My reference, which gives me the optimism, is we've only really got started, because even though we've got some market failures, 1975 biologics first discovered, it was only until 2001 Herceptin really made it. So in this space, I think we really just got started. And then finally, it's the commercial model. You've got people who are underwhelmed by what I think Paul was saying. So there's going to be some different models on how you bring these rarer diseases into an assembly of assets, or as we move towards optogenetics, in vivo CAR Ts, and solving for prevalent conditions. That's going to require very different, I would say, system reconstruct on how we, change the incentive structure around chronic treatments and ongoing care to see a doctor to one time. And I think that is where the real societal debate needs to happen on what society is willing to pay and reward for innovation. And number 2, how then we can join hands and execute beyond the regulator.
I think if I can just segue on, Tay, I couldn't agree more with you. And I think in setting the finish lines that we've discussed, it then quickly comes back to but what are all the entities that are already currently and create a lot of the problems, misalignments, and other kinds of things. These conditions, with upfront investment and lifetime potential rewards, in addition to ongoing kinds of treatments, requires an alignment between a long-term delivery system of care that potentially goes beyond the medical clinic, and it requires that financial structure as well. And so just as a thought experiment to put in the back of your head, imagine if these kinds of treatments were covered and underwritten by an entity like a life insurer rather than a health insurer. It's the only entity in the world that pays for the absence of disease or for the curative aspects of disease, potentially paying more up front. And so it's that kind of thinking that transcends all of the existing players, where there's incredible financial value to individuals as well as improvements in their lives and financial value to everyone else, but it will require structures that realize that over time and entities that take that risk. And some of that risk may need to be backstopped by public entities, but there's a lot of capital there and a lot of value because we have much greater certainty in how to design and deliver and the efficacy. We just have to have entities that we create that take that risk and bundle the whole patient experience from diagnostics to monitoring.
We have a constraint. Time is of the essence, and we talked about strategies that are going to deliver in 3 to 5 years. So if you can comment on what are some of those strategies that can be put into action ASAP, and then how can then, because a lot of people are looking for opportunities to essentially change how we develop drugs. So is 3 to 5 years realistic? So Paul?
I want to say yes, but I think I'm a little biased there. Yes to that, and also just to maybe give some concrete examples of what we had discussed within the 3 to 5 years. I mean, obviously, I've harped a little bit on the idea of platform manufacturing and moving from there, but I also think that moving away from manufacturing, there are also operational and financial changes that we can look at. On an operational framework, we discussed understanding the diagnostics and understanding the patient journey and diagnosis. There are a vast amount of approved therapies that get approved well before a newborn screening is even understood, right, and widely accepted. And so thinking about an operational framework where newborn screening can go well beyond the traditional RUSP that we have and start to encapsulate and encompass the genomic innovation that we currently have and work across. Moving away operationally, financially, we've talked about backstop mechanisms, but I think something that we often don't discuss much is when we think about coordination of stakeholders, right now everyone operates in their own lane. Academics are thinking about innovation, industry's thinking about commercialization, regulatory's thinking about protecting safety, patient advocacies are trying their hardest to group everything together, but often are left without the financial infrastructure to be able to do as much as they aim to do. The fact of the matter is everyone stays within their lanes. And there have only been a few times across history that we've seen coordination across stakeholders work so well, and it's always been based on incentive. The RUSP between the NIH and the FDA started getting newborn screening across the United States. We talked a little bit about this, the priority review voucher. For those of you that are not familiar, I'm not going to spend time talking about it, but it's basically Willy Wonka's golden ticket. It's this idea of helping fund rare diseases in a realm in which there isn't necessarily enough funding for them. That was the first time that there was real coordination amongst, financial bodies between industry and smaller players to be able to actually continue to fund these therapies. But we're basically living on a crutch right now. Everyone is trying to do something with very little resources that are in play. And so to me, in the next 3 to 5 years, I think the thing that will change the most is trying to find a way across that coordination. Whether it's data portability, whether it's new policies, whether it's new manufacturing practices, I think that is how we get over the hump.
Yeah, and so, Maria, we talked about the fact that we may need a coordination body, whether it's a board or syndicate or whatever, where all these groups can actually sit around the same table and talk about how to work together. So what do you think? Is that possible within 3 to 5 years?
Absolutely. I think we need it sooner than 3 to 5 years. I think the more, CIRM's been involved in part of panels and convening meetings for the last couple of years around this topic. And oftentimes you leave and you're like, okay, what's next? And it's like the next time you just go and it's similar conversations. We all agree that these are the challenges. And I used to leave a little frustrated that we couldn't come up with a solution. But what I found was the more people you go out and talk to, and the more agreement you get around what the challenges are, and the more people you bring into the conversation, it just gets easier to sort of narrow the pool of the people you need at the table. And so I think it's 100% possible, and I absolutely think it needs to happen before 3 years.
If I can just add on to that, I agree. We need to. It's very much what I'm trying to build now, and it's talking about it. We're all in kind of violent agreement, which is great. In terms of action, so the way I see it, we have hundreds, if not thousands hundreds of thousands of patients who have been diagnosed, who are carrying their genomic sequence reports. We can start with patients. We can crank the engine around one patient at a time and understand what are all the different pieces of the puzzle that need to come together to solve for that patient. Do it over and over again. This is throwing fuel on the fire of the process of how baby KJ, who was born in a lucky geography, was lucky to have the right person on call to do the sequencing, and lucky to be able to be transferred and have in that campus the people to design and develop his therapy. It shouldn't depend on luck. Hence, a virtual networking where expertise that is distributed all over the world, no single institution can solve this on their own, but the best institutions that have the expertise can all feed into it together. And again, California can do this, and think about how do we actually put the center back in the middle of the ecosystem, and figure out what are the incentives that can align all of the different players around that patient. So it's kind of flying as you're driving at the same time, but that's how I believe we can activate what we're all thinking in our heads.
Yeah, and Tay, if I can ask you, you have had the idea of we need to reframe evidence and payment around not upfront cost, but about added value long term. So can you make a comment regarding that?
Yeah, I'll be brief in the interest of time on this. Look, we had a very nice, I call it the back end of the presentation by Kite. Obviously, it's a local California-based company, 35,000 patients treated, billions probably put in. I think, just to remind folks, the company was bought for $11 billion of an autologous therapy. So that's a significant risk that Gilead at the time took to purchase Kite. But I think in this sort of 21st century, we've got to also manufacturers, whereas a lot of the world I've been in, have to become more intentional around how we get rewarded for not only the risk we take, but also given that these therapies and the regulatory environment has shown us can pivot very quickly from phase 1 to 2 to approval, there has to be a commitment from commercial manufacturers on the long-term durability, the long-term follow-up, and as Jeremy was saying, over time, think about these payment models, that has to be sequenced. So you're not, from the pills of the past where you get a regulatory approval and then you ride off into the sunset. It's like a continuous monetization of that. This is a very different model where recent mood music has been muted because people cannot validate the commercial model, whether it's for rare disease or prevalence. So I'd like to see even manufacturers underwrite different levels of risk and have a commitment to the long-term follow-up and the durability. So the intervention says what it's going to do on the can. And I think that's going to be an important way to elevate the way manufacturers also deal with this topic. And there's governments around the world where they've almost forced us to converge to say, if you're going to be rewarded on this, then you need to do a 5-year commitment to follow up. And that's why I think partnering to go further together, if you're a smaller organization, rather than going fast alone, is very important. And I just wanted to make a shout out to CIRM, which I think is important, is they've started to weave some of this into their grant processes and say, what are we solving for here? And are you solving for the end in mind? And I think having those small incremental steps are going to really, really help move the field forward.
So for a quick exercise for all of you. If you were to think of 3 things that we need to act on immediately to validate what we said today and to actually deliver in 3 to 5 years, what would be those 3? Jeremy?
I completely agree with Tay, and I think extending the duration of outcome-based payments is an incredibly important part. Some companies with smaller balance sheets are going to need this financial intermediary that I talked about. Others with larger ones can do it longer. The other piece of it that I'll raise here is we should pay people for their data. We need to create push in the ecosystem for that long-term monitoring and the long-term kinds of outcomes. We have lots of things happening in the EMR space and other kinds of things, but pay people, even if they're micropayments, for their data, and you will get much better quality
Paul's
data.
turn.
Yeah.
Paul?
I'll keep it short since I feel like I already said 3. I think changing the corporate structure and incentive structure of organizations to start to match the timeline of the science is going to be incredibly important.
Thank you. Don?
Single payer. I think in enlightened nations that have a national health service, the benefits can be realized. So we're putting out $500,000 now to cure a patient with sickle cell disease, and we're going to save it down the long, over the years. So I think really the way our health system is so fractionated, no one wants to take the risk. And so I think we need to change it how we.
Is it possible to replicate a single payer within one state?
That's outside.
What's Maria?
I think some in state government have wanted that to happen, but they've been met with challenges. So I don't know. I don't know how possible that is.
Yeah, I think if we can carry on with the theme that California is the right setting to translate a lot of what was discussed here today. There may be some hang-ups, but there's a good start that has been established with this effort. So what are the 3 things, Maria, on your mind?
I don't have 3. I would say in the interim, until something bigger can be discovered or put together, I would say expanding the CMMI pilot program to more disease indications would be a start if it works. And again, they haven't really disclosed what they call a success. I would consider that more patients get more access and are reimbursed a success. So perhaps that's their criteria, but that could be expanded. I would also say, and this is something that that I know our own internal program managers have felt, if you could get more of the sponsors across academia and industry to share the data and their learnings, it really and be comfortable doing that, it really would. Probably result in more successes and perhaps less expensive and cut down on that.
Thank you. And Mimi, we only have 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, I will double down on the data federation. The idea of data being the value that people have moded into silos is very yesterday. We have compute skills that can allow data sit where there is. And I agree with Jeremy to invite patients to be participants in that economy and have downstream rewards is definitely part of the solution. The other thing is I really invite us to think about cell and gene outside of the traditional pharma model. Like Tay said, it's a completely different thing. It's an intervention. I used to be a surgeon. It's an intervention. Every patient is different. It's an occurrence. It's an event. It's not a routine medication that's a prescription that you'll take for the rest of your life. It's not a drug-first model. We can do this as a patient-first model and in a bundled payment that goes from diagnostic all the way through the treatment and lifelong follow-up. And that's I really invite us to just step away from thinking we have to think about drugs and how to pay for drugs and how to get drugs accessible. It's not. We need to figure out how to distribute and disperse the process so that interventions can happen anywhere. It's already happening in other hospitals around the world.
Turn. We have 30 seconds.
I'll use 10. And I think if I'm sitting and listening to the panel, I don't think we'd be debating if someone should have a lung transplant or a heart transplant or
any organ transplant.
Yeah, so I think for me, the one thing I'd like is for us to do is elevate a real societal debate on what society is willing to pay for innovation and really lift the lid off that, and then we can see what are the right enablers to make that happen.
Thank you very much. We have 5 seconds. Well, I just want to let the audience know there will be like a recording of this effort, right? Okay, and also we're going to encourage a way to actually write what we said in some kind of a document. So stay tuned, and thank you for being here.